Um, and I think I've just been spotlighted, so hopefully people are hearing and seeing me okay. So just to welcome everybody, one or two others will join us no doubt as the call goes on. Leyton Cleveley, surprisingly enough, is from Cleveley using his surname Dynamics, and it's great to have everyone here, and Leighton in particular. Two general notices before we start. The first, as is the custom, and now is a good time to do it, to go on mute, which we normally do during these type of talks. The talk itself will be about 20 minutes, and that will be followed by 10 minutes for questions. After that, if people want to stay on the Zoom, it's just a free-for-all general chat. If anyone wants to make a connection with former friends and so on, the line will be open for a chat. And the second point was the one I started talking about there with Michael, that there are chaplaincy services available from Michael's Business Matters, St. Cuthbert's, and so on. And it's all about just people chatting through how they're feeling. And some of us are having a tough time in the workplace just now. Many of us on this call will have considered working for ourselves at some time or other during our working lives, or if we're still working, some might be considering running a small, medium enterprise or even an individual business. A lot of us, of course, stay in big companies or big organizations, and that's why we're delighted to have Leighton here, because he is very much running a one-man business. Ironically, much of the future employment in the UK and in Scotland in particular will probably come through small, medium enterprises. So Leighton can tell us how to do it. A little background on Leighton for you. He graduated university with an honours degree in applied physics and computer science in 1995, and then started as a programmer and has had a career in IT ever since. He worked at various levels as a developer, software production, a cloud app production before it was called the cloud, until 2003, when he became self-employed. He spent 13 years working in the Far East and the Far West before opening up shop in Fife about 18 months ago. And the fact that he's here today means he must be doing reasonably well. He's worked in the IT industry since graduation and has never done any other work. He now provides custom software, consultancy, and technical support in business in and around the Central Belt, including, I should say, St. Cuthbert's, where we've been pleased to have his IT work, and some places much further away. Leighton, we're delighted to have you with us. We invite you to speak about your experience of running your business, and you've chosen a most interesting title, Disaster 2.0, Easier the Second Time. Over to you, Leighton, and thank you again.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you very much for that introduction, Martin. I think that pretty much sums up everything there on a reasonable level. About being mute, I wish I could as well, because I'm sure it'd be a far more interesting talk. I thought, with all the Zoom and everything that's going on at the moment, I thought that we would have more of a story time rather than death by PowerPoint, because I'm sure that everybody's had enough of PowerPoint slides in these kind of areas. Right, as Martin said, I've spent a lot of time self-employed running my own business at various levels and various guises. I was very much freelance and working abroad. I'm kind of a specialist in non-English speaking systems. So producing application software for people that don't use the Roman alphabet, like Arabic, which reads right to left, and Japanese and Chinese, which reads left to right, right to left, up to down, and every other which way that you can possibly imagine. So I've spent rather a large amount of time traveling and working remotely. For me, this is situation normal to be on video calls because your clients are half a world away, and believe me, you don't just want to make a day trip. It's just not practical. So, you know, I'm kind of used to video conferencing and doing a lot of that. My wife actually is Scottish, and she did her undergrad and postgraduate courses in Aberdeen. We then basically moved out of Aberdeen and down to Fife because she couldn't find a job that she liked anywhere else except Fife, and that's how we arrived. As you can tell, I'm definitely not Scottish, even though I've been living here for like 14 years. So onwards to disaster 2.0. This pandemic is not the first time that I have faced a massive issue with business. So I thought I would run through some of my experiences of this and what I learned from the first time around to apply to the second time around. I know a lot of people will have probably come across this, but we'll go anywhere. So what I'd like to do is set the Wayback Machine to the 11th of March 2011 at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, I'm not sure if people would remember that date specifically, but it is the date that the magnitude 9 earthquake happened in Japan, where my office is and where I was on that day. So I'm presuming that everybody will probably remember this. It was fairly well publicized at the time. What I'd like to do is to set the little bit of scope a couple of days before. On the 9th of March, on the Wednesday, we had quite a strong magnitude 7.1 earthquake. Now, for anybody who's not been in an earthquake, a magnitude 6 is the equivalent of about a nuclear bomb going off. A couple of years ago, a magnitude 6 leveled an entire village in Italy and knocked the church down and caused quite a lot of damage. And this was a magnitude 7.1, so it was 20 times the force of that. So we're sat around in the office. It was late in the afternoon, and it just hit. And you got bang, 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 like they say, everything rattles. And I mean, working in Japan, you get used to earthquakes. They just happen. They happen all the time. You don't feel most of them. So this was banging around, and you go, oh, it lasted about 10 seconds, which is a bit longer than you'd like. And I'm like, ooh, that was quite nasty. That one might be reported on the news. So I contacted my mother, who is usually far more, upset about these things than anybody else. So I'm like, there was a big earthquake, it might be reported. She's like, no, nothing's been mentioned. So anyway, back to the Friday afternoon. We're sat in the office, it's 2 o'clock. We were going away that weekend up to the hot springs, and I'll come back to that story a little bit later. So we're sat there, and we started to have an earthquake. Now, the only reason we knew this was starting was because you could see the blinds moving. Quite often, you get very small earthquakes that move the building, but you don't feel it. You only notice it because the blinds act like a pendulum and they don't move. So you're moving, the blinds are stationary, but it looks like the blinds moving. Like, oh, we're having an earthquake. But 10 seconds later, oh, this is quite a long one. I mean, we couldn't actually feel it at this point in time. Now, this is where things get weird. How many people can drive? I presume everybody here pretty much can drive or has been in a car. You know, when you put your car in the wrong gear and you put your foot down and it gathers pace very slowly, and suddenly your car goes, I'm quite happy now, and then suddenly accelerates really hard. That is exactly what happened. It suddenly, before we even knew that this was going to be a major earthquake, just accelerated, and it went like that. So within 10 seconds, we went from the blinds doing this to the building shifting about 2 meters either side. You couldn't stand up, you couldn't do anything on there. All we did was standard dive under a desk. I mean, we've all got very thick desks like this because of the stuff in the ceiling. The ceiling is full of air conditioners and other concrete beams and things like that you don't want falling on your head. So hopefully the desk would maybe not stop it, it would potentially save your life. So everything on the shelves in the office is everywhere. It's like a storm in there. Books flying around, computers going everywhere because we all use laptops, so they're going everywhere. The only thing that didn't fall over was my monitor, amazingly enough. So that lasted for about 3.5 minutes, which I can tell you is the longest 3.5 minutes of my life, because you think, how much punishment can this building take? You know, I'm like, seriously, it was heavily, heavily punishing the building. So it stopped after this. It started to ease down, and the building got to the point where it was moving, but we could stand up safely. We stood up and went, right, we're out of here. As you can imagine, we do not want to be hanging around in the building, because there's other problems that's about to happen, and I'll tell you about in a moment. So we head to the emergency exit, which is next to the lift, and we got there, and the lift shaft has now got a crack in it about that wide, and about, well, you can't really say, about 3/4 of a meter, so about 2.5 foot, and about open that much where you could see through the building where it had just split. So we're like, right, okay, we don't need to be here anymore. I'm telling you, how fast you can exit a building when there's a problem is phenomenal. Down the emergency escape. You look at an emergency escape and you go, they could be tricky to get down. Believe me, no, they're not. They're very easy to get down. So we got out, and as I was saying earlier on, that we were going up to the mountains for a trip that weekend. So we'd actually gone in the car that day, which is unusual in Tokyo. You mostly take the train, which is just as well, because all the trains are now knocked out. All the transport, everything is now ceased, because it automatically knocks off on big earthquakes in case it's destroyed the tracks. So we are outside. About 10 minutes later, and we get the first aftershock. Now, aftershocks is something that probably wasn't as publicised as the main earthquake was. So, I mean, the main earthquake destroyed about 46,000 buildings in Japan. It also causes aftershocks. So every 15 minutes, on average, we were experiencing a feelable earthquake, which is magnitude 4.5 upwards, as I say, every 15 minutes. So in the middle of the night, the house would go bang, 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 and you don't know whether it's another big earthquake or it's just an aftershock. So yeah, they're going bang, bang, bang. Oh, okay, it was an aftershock, 3 in the morning. 4 in the morning, you're woken up again with it. So it was quite a time. So I managed to contact home, and I called my mum again, first of all, because I know my girlfriend wouldn't be too bad, but my mum would be in a panic. And I phoned up and said, there's been an earthquake. And Mum went, well, the last one wasn't on the TV. I said, believe me, this one will be. And at this moment in time, we didn't know about the tsunami and any of that coming in. Now, we should have been, when I said we were going away, we were going up to the hot springs, which was about 20 kilometers from the nuclear power station that went, the Fukushima station. If it had happened 2.5 hours later, we would have been pretty much next to the nuclear station, completely knocked out of all communications and all transport. So it would have been a problem there. So I'm kind of glad that it happened in Tokyo. We were quite lucky there wasn't that many damages. Now, the biggest problem was you might have heard that there was a town called Sendai, and that was pretty much wiped out. And that's where a lot of our clients were. So within 3 minutes and about an hour later, pretty much all our business was gone, literally gone. Just, that's it. Unpaid invoices, you're never going to see them again because the company doesn't exist. So you then have to come in and think about what you're going to do with how you're going to move forward with this and go. So there was quite an interesting weekend, to say the least. I mean, it killed something around about 25,000 people, destroyed about 46,000 buildings and businesses. Now, we were lucky that not everything was based in Sendai or around on the eastern shores where it happened. So we were quite relieved that obviously our Tokyo people were still intact, but everybody is pretty much ceased trading. We got power problems, we got nuclear reactor problems, we got many and varied problems with this. All the heat that you get there as well is electricity. So there's no sort of gas-fired central heating. Everything is based on these heater and coolers that you get for doing combined air conditioning. So the government was saying, can you please not use them because we haven't got spare power when losing a nuclear reactor. And it was March time and it gets cold there. I mean, you get ice on the outside of the windows there. So there was quite a challenge with that, as you can imagine. So kind of moving on a little bit from that, to sort of what's the takeaway from these kind of things that happen is, you know, number one is don't panic. Whenever something strikes like this or happens, there's a lot of people running around going, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The Japanese people were still, to cross the road, they were still waiting for the Pelican crossings to have the green man to tell you you can cross. They are superbly disciplined people that work for everybody. They know that there's a lot of bureaucracy, it's Japan, it's exactly how you think it is, but they work together. Everybody works together to pull through these. There's no people having, you know, mad fits on the road. None of the trains are working fine. Everybody walks home. That's just how it is. So it's like, okay, everybody out, start to walk home. So the first thing, as I said, is don't panic. You put your hands in your pockets and you have a think, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Because we can't just, you know, jump out of this. There's no way of escaping this. You're in it, you're going to have to ride it and stay there. Now, the second most important thing, which I know everybody goes on about in business, is cash flow. But on something like this, this is where your reserves come in and they're almost a lifesaver, because suddenly all your business is gone. You're not likely to get, these invoices are gone. That's it. Anything you were outstanding, you're never going to see. You know, you can't even go after it because they don't exist anymore, or whoever is out there, the country's in disarray. You're not going to get it. But by having lots of, or a reasonable cash flow, you're not too bad. When this global pandemic started, the first thing I did was, right, let's have a look at the cash flow. What have we got? Because I know that I'm going to have customers that could be possibly not paying me. What is going to be happening? First thing, cash flow. Right, I can do this. Then I can do some cash flow forecasts and go, right, if I pull my neck right in, I can last so many months and there isn't any problem. Because it does take weeks before things get moving again. The second most important thing after that is to talk to your clients. If you've got any clients out there that you haven't spoken to for a long time or anything like that, get on the phone to them. Find out what's happening. You might find that they are not as badly affected as you, or they can offer you help, or you can offer them help. By the very fact that I picked up my phone and the first thing I did was call all my clients and go, right, you know, what's happening? Can I help you? Can I do anything else? Not only in my IT, I can do other bits and pieces. You know, are you needing anybody on site to help or do anything? That makes sure that you are still up in their brains. When you think we have a problem, who are we going to call? We'll call this guy because he's good and he knows what he's doing and he can help and be multi-skilled. The more facets that you have and the more skills that you have, the more use that you can be to your clients. And that's also a big takeaway from that. I mean, I've always updated and redone my skills. I can do a lot of things. Necessarily, I wouldn't call me in for brain surgery, but you could call me in to push somebody into the theatre. I can handle that, no problem. So there's lots of things out there that you can do to help. The other thing is things happen very quickly as well. You need to be on the ball with everything. So make lists, get organized. It's very easy for things to slip through the cracks out there and they get missed. And you must make sure that things are not missed. That's good business practice anyway. Sorry, my phone. That's good business practice anyway. However, when you're in a pandemic and you don't know what's going to happen, you don't want things piling up because people talk and it doesn't look good for your business. Moving on from that, it's time to start thinking laterally as well. The companies that are going to survive through any of these problems are the ones that can diversify and can do many things. So it's like me. I mean, by profession, I'm a software engineer, but I can turn my hand to pretty much anything in the IT industry. I've used everything from Macs to PCs to Linux to Windows, servers, web servers, data centers, and everything in between. You know, I either know about it off the top of my head or I know the people to speak to about it, and I can help you. And that's the other thing, is just being helpful out there. The next thing is, I think Martin touched on this, which is stress and how to deal with it. Make sure that you speak to your support networks, your business networks, speak to your family, because all of this adds an extra load on you, because I've had a quiet month this month. So I've used the time to work on new products, which I've got various software products and projects running out there. So I use my time appropriately. You know, you never sit there having sit there staring at your screen. You need to push yourself to do stuff. And if you can't, you need to speak to people and get help. The quicker that you can deal with it and get on board with everything is the quicker that you move forward. Remember, not all businesses will survive what's going on at the moment. That is just fact. It's a hard world in business sometimes, and this adds to it. You need to make sure that you're going to be one that isn't going to be affected. And the last point really I'm going to make, that normality is relative. Whenever anything happens big, it never goes back to how it was before. There will be some shifts, but there won't be completely shifted back to how it was before. It will always exist. You will have always existed in this time, and people will be affected by it. But again, the work that you put in and speaking to your people and talking to your support networks is what keeps you moving forward and adapting into the whatever happens. I don't want to use the term the new normal, because normal changes all the time. What's normal? It's always different out there. Technology always changes. Everything changes. Just depends at the pace that it changes at, and events like this move up the rate of change. And that brings me back to the point of the people and the businesses that survive this are the ones that can adapt to the situation. That is literally the truth. You look at, I'm just trying to think of a company, you know, there's companies out there that start, there's none come to mind, I should have made a note, that started doing something else, like IBM and typewriters. IBM now do not manufacture typewriters, not anymore. You know, they do vast other things. So I think I'll possibly end my talk on that point there and sort of hand back to Martin. And I hope you found that relatively entertaining and relatively interesting for a sort of lunchtime talk.
Leighton, thank you for a fascinating talk, particularly about the Japan angle, because that's a very interesting way of capturing our imagination and interest. Before you sort of finish your talk and we go to questions and answers, could you just tell us, you know, how long did you stay in Japan after the earthquake? And it was fascinating to hear that you found all your former clients, although obviously many of them were in a poor state. How long did you stay, and how did you eventually end up settling 18 months ago in your business in 5? Could you just fill in that bit of the picture, please?
Well, there was. I stayed about 3.5 weeks I was about halfway through a trip, and I needed to stay there to basically make sure that we had a business when I came back. So it was pulling in a lot of speaking to people. There was a lot of people decided that they wanted to be somewhere else other than Tokyo. Admittedly, we fueled the car up and we had a full tank of fuel in case we needed to actually leave Tokyo, because I could have traveled down to Nagoya and caught a plane back from there. But it never came to that at all. It was fine. There was some queuing up for food. Bottled water became really scarce because of the problem with the nuclear reactor. Bearing in mind, the amount of radiation that came out of it was actually slightly less than the background radiation in Aberdeen from all of the granite. So it was actually slightly more, it was slightly healthier than it was in Aberdeen. So there's an interesting fact there. Sorry, about coming back. Yeah, coming back was interesting. When I left Japan, I flew on a 777, you know, one of the planes that just dropped an engine off. I wasn't on that one, no, we were all right. A 777, and there was 15 people on it. So we actually got good seats for a change. So that was fun. But when we left, there was no food or drink or anything on the plane. We actually had to fly from Tokyo to South Korea in Seoul, fuel the plane and get some food on board, and very importantly, a gin and tonic, because there was no gin on board. You can't fly without a gin and tonic, I ask you, and then fly back. I have to admit, I was glad to get back home with that, I have to say. I got home and I've actually never been so glad to actually be back home, which was quite nice. You were saying about stopping in Fife. Well, it got to the point where the traveling was just getting insane. In 2017, I did 6 weeks in Tokyo. I flew home for 5 days. I flew to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia for a week. I flew back home. I was back home for 10 days. And I flew to California and did 6 weeks just outside of LA. The traveling was becoming insane. And it was traveling. It sounds really good until you have to do it. And when you travel for business, you don't see all the good bits. You see the inside of a cheap hotel and the inside of a cheaper office. And that was it. It was just, it was madness. It really was. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it and I'm glad to go and see these places. But, you know, when you're 6 weeks later, you're stood at one side of the Pacific and then you're stood at the other side of the Pacific, looking at each side, it just, the traveling becomes madness. I mean, I still do work and I have customers abroad. It's just that that's not the focus of me traveling anymore. I mean, I handle the e-commerce systems for an Australian company. You know, so I still do bits and pieces from abroad, but it's more now a more focused approach in Fife, where I don't have to fly or go through airports or experience airports.
Yes, your carbon footprint must have been dreadful, Leighton, but we won't go into that.
Don't even want to think.
We'll save climate change for another time. Thank you for filling in that gap at the end. Well, you're all invited now to ask a question or make a comment. It can be business, it can be the more interesting story there about the Japan connection and so on. I'm sure many of us remember the meltdown of the nuclear reactor there in Japan at the time and so on. So if you would like to ask a question, give me a wave and come off mute and go ahead, please. Questions, over to you. I'm looking for a first hand.
Everybody's going.
Yep, Ian's going to go first. Ian, come off mute and please ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leighton. That was absolutely fascinating. Being stuck in a crisis like that is, one of my friends had a similar experience in Christchurch when the earthquake came. He was actually standing on the first tee and he hit his drive and suddenly the fairway disappeared from in front of his face and he looked back and the clubhouse disappeared and he got in his car and started driving like fury. And we've always joked with him. He says, "Did you get your ball before you went?" Because he's very Scottish. But I think it brings home to us all the traumas of that. And I mean, how's about your family? They must have been pretty terrified as well.
Yes, they were.
How did the communications go between you and them? Was that must have been a bit of a nightmare?
It was back then. It wasn't as easy as it was now to get mobile data communications. Japan is very funny about letting foreigners have internet connection for some strange reason, and I was very lucky that I managed to procure one of these. Have you seen these MiFi devices? It's like a little Wi-Fi router that you put a SIM card in and it will give you wireless internet access. Right. I managed to get one of those and it was a lifesaver because I could use it anywhere. And the telecommunications network went down immediately. All voice communications died, but mobile internet stayed working. That's how I was able to contact back home so quickly, because I was able to make a Skype call via my mobile phone and this MiFi device, which was very lucky because by the time I spoke to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, it was already on the news. As soon as I spoke to her, I think it was about 7:15 in the morning, given the time difference. And I called and I said, "There's been an earthquake. It will be on the TV, but we're all right." So we're in the car, we're on our way back to the house. And she already, because we had a TV in the bedroom at the time. So she turned on the TV and it was already all over the news that there's been a massive earthquake and that going on. So, but we're very lucky that Japan is built for earthquakes. You know, a magnitude 6, which is really bad in some places. I mean, a magnitude 6, you know, okay, it rattles you around, but that's it. There would be no damage at all. I mean, there was very little damage in and around Tokyo with that large earthquake. There was actually the biggest problem was it shook tiles off buildings. If you're outside, you're likely to actually get hit by a tile coming off a building, but that was very few and far between. I mean, I did see a few, but as I said, I was sat in the office, so it wasn't really. I was more concerned about the air conditioner that was above my desk because it was one of these great big things. I really don't want that in the face.
Now that's interesting because we become so reliant on technology. I like the idea that you've got this wee Wi-Fi thing. That must be worth advertising around because anybody who's traveling abroad should probably have that as a backup.
What I've got in my phone, I've actually got, I've had for years a dual SIM card phone that whenever I travel abroad, I always have a local SIM card in there. And I always have local access to data and make sure that I've got access to data, just in case.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Michael is the next one to ask for a question, and then we'll go to Maggie. So Michael first, please go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Leighton, for your interesting talk, and particularly the sort of practical steps that you have suggested to help people get through difficult times, whether it be a disaster or some of the challenges we're facing at the moment. A couple of questions which are, one's a sort of short-term one, one's slightly longer term. And as a self-employed person, there's been a lot of talk about government support during the present pandemic. What one thing could government do to help people like yourselves to get through this sort of challenging period is my first question. And then the second question, while you're thinking about that one, is you talked about the importance of being able to adapt to different situations as a way of sort of surviving. What does that, if anything, suggest in terms of how governments and should be thinking about education systems and the support and the education that's given to younger people as they prepare themselves for the world of work?
Right. I'll tackle the first question first, being useful on that. The biggest problem I found is rather than they gave us the small business support money based on our profit, not on our turnover. And when you're a business, it's your turnover that actually matters, because I mean, I'm still having to pay data centers and fees for website registration and everything else. So by the time that you count that, the money that you actually get is not going to keep your business running. I mean, you know, the money that I received, I'm like, well, yeah, thanks. That isn't going to make me stay at home. I can't afford to on that. I've got to still be out actually doing trade and moving around. I'm lucky that one, IT counts as essential services, and several of my clients are essential people. So I have to be out and about and doing work for them, keeping them running. So the answer to the first question is more money and do it in a much fairer way. Don't be tight about this, because they've already threatened that they're going to hit small business to get money back. So, you know, you might as well just do it properly in the first place and don't leave us hanging out to dry like we feel we have been. The second question, what was that? Educating young people in schools.
Yeah.
One of my pet peeves with school, after, believe it or not, attending, after you see my writing skills, you wouldn't necessarily believe I did. But one of the things that I really hate about school is they don't teach enough practical skills. So when you're at school, you don't learn about tax particularly. You don't learn about, you know, do I want a limited company, or do I need a limited liability partnership? I know these are things that are not necessarily massively important up there, but tax skills are. You know, there's so many people I know that even in this pandemic are not claiming what they should be from their employers or from the government in terms of tax relief, working from home, and things like that. You just end up learning it through osmosis and paying your accountant. I mean, most people don't have access to an accountant. And that brings me round to another subject, is you don't know what you don't know. If you've not been taught anything about this, you don't even know where to go. You don't know who to speak to. And that's a really big pet peeve of mine. Even if it was mentioned at school and said, right, if you're dealing with money and you're working, you know, you're working for a company, you're going to get PAYE, check this, check your tax code. I mean, when I first started working, I mean, I graduated, you know, I got this shiny degree in your hand, which doesn't necessarily mean you're going to know stuff about tax. I mean, my degree had spent mostly programming and poking my finger into the fabric of reality. It didn't cover tax. So I ended up with getting this massive tax rebate and going, what the hell is this? And I'd been on an emergency tax code for 6 months. I hadn't got a clue. Nobody had said, this is how PAYE works. This is how the world works. You know, that would have been highly useful, and it would have been highly useful moving forward in that as well, to give an appreciation of people that there's things out there that you don't know. You need to go and look at this or read this. You know, so I hope that goes somewhat towards it, even though it might be not exactly what you might have been looking for.
They're really good answers, Leighton. No, I very much appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael and Leighton. Go
Maggie.
to Maggie for a question, and after Maggie's asked a question, and Leighton, perhaps we'll take one more question, and I wonder whether Catherine or Anne Wiley or Kerry might want to ask the last question. But over to Maggie for the next question, please.
Thank you, Leighton, for just a most marvellous talk. When you were talking about this, it reminded me of something I was at a few years ago, when a Christian Aid gathering, where we were actually asked to sit in a group and discuss what would we do if we all had to suddenly leave with less than 24-hour notices. We had to suddenly go somewhere in Scotland away from the Central Belt because something dreadful had happened. What would we do? And everybody sat there absolutely flummoxed and thought, oh my goodness, what would we do? Where would we go? What would we take with us? And I remember thinking, oh, who would we take with us? And what would we do with Granny? And you know, all these things. And it made us all jolt us out of our comfortable, you know, settings.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to deal with anything like this. And I would say that since the pandemic has struck, this is the first thing that really seems to have hit us all as a country. That we either all have to try and work together and do our bit for this, and you know, but I found just the way how everybody in Japan was so prepared, and we maybe have to start thinking in our own lives about how much more prepared we are.
Yeah, we're very lucky in this country. Nothing really much happens here in terms of shake-ups or things like that. Whereas Japan, you live with earthquakes all the time. So in the office, we actually have an earthquake kit. You get a hard hat, which doesn't fit anybody from the Western Hemisphere. I mean, as Oscar and Martin have met me, I mean, I'm not a small guy. I mean, I'm 6'2" tall. You know, I'm that wide just across my shoulders. And, you know, there still is the kits there because you know that it's going to happen, and the school kids get earthquake training. You know, here we get the odd fire drill. They get earthquake training and things like that. So people do think about that more or less. I mean, as you were saying about, you know, prioritizing things that you take. I mean, the first thing I did was I grabbed my laptop, my phone, and took that with me because as long as I've got those, I've got my life with me, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, you know, things like clothes and stuff like that are, you know, they're reasonably important, but they're not the be all and end all when you're running away. You know, it's nice to have a change of clothes, but honestly, you know, you're more thinking about what am I going to drink, what am I going to eat, and what am I going to drink. You know, the roads are knocked out. I mean, it knocked all the roads out. I mean, I joke about this one, but at the time, you know, we couldn't get any of the beer that we liked because it all came from Hokkaido, the North Island. But it was like, you know, you couldn't get bottled water. You couldn't get, like, you didn't know whether what was coming out the tap was safe either. I mean, it looked safe, it smelled safe, but radiation doesn't smell. And it's all things like that you just have to go with it. I mean, we weren't without food and we weren't without electricity and things like that, but we were asked to make sure that you are frugal with things, you know, and everybody worked together, which here it has annoyed me somewhat in the pandemic that you get people that say we're not going to do this because this, that, and the other. That never happens in Japan. And if you look at the Far East, how their COVID response was, sorry, I didn't mean to mention the C word, how that's like, they suffered from it far less than we did because people did what they were told. They did what the experts said, and unbelievably, that's what happens. I mean, in Japan, people wear, if you've got a cough or a sniffle in Japan, people wear face masks. It's just a normal thing. That's what you do. You put a mask on to stop things happening. You know, so it's horses for courses. But I do feel that people are somewhat, they need to be a little bit more believing and helping people rather than, I'm just going to do this because I don't believe it. Well, what you believe is irrelevant. You know, the facts are facts. What you believe, you know, is what you've watched on YouTube is not a relevant thing here. You know, we're talking to experts, not people who think they're an expert because I watched a YouTube video on Bill Gates microchipping you. You know, so don't start me on that. That's a whole different rant for a different day.
Thank you again, Leighton, and thank you, Maggie, for a very interesting question you brought up there. For our last question, we've just lost Catherine and Michael because we're meant to keep this to a lunchtime. I wonder whether Kerry or Anne, either of you want to ask a last question. Kerry's happy to do so. So go ahead, Kerry, and then Anne, if you've got a quick question, you could do the very last one. Kerry first.
I'll keep it very quick. I was just going to ask, I was just intrigued like by what you said about the sort of team spirit
Mm.
of Japanese, about how everybody sort of like pitched in to help each other, you know. And I was really sort of struck by that, really. I mean, you sound like you've traveled a lot, an awful lot, to be honest. I mean, is this something that you've seen in a lot of other cultures, really? I mean, sort of, no, do you think it's quite unique to Japan?
No, it's quite unique to Japan and Far East generally. Malaysia is very similar to that. People are a lot more, you know, they're team orientated. They're a lot more, we're all in this together, so let's make it easy, rather than, you know, I'm the king of my own castle and everybody else can swing their hook. You know, I try to run my business more based on more a Japanese way of doing things, where you're helpful and respectful, and, you know, your customer is king. You know, it is a tough one. It really is. It's part cultural as well. It is, you know, it is an entirely different culture.
Yeah.
Because when I'm there, I'm living there. You live it, which is very different to going on holiday. So I'm used to turning up in Tokyo, and I know how everything works there. The first trips that I had there weren't a nightmare, but it was just so different. You know, you get 4 weeks in, and it starts becoming a real mental struggle with it, because everything is so different.
Yeah.
You know, but then you get used to it, and you just get on with it. I mean, I would manage far better in Tokyo than I would in London. You know, well, because I know it better. I know, you know, I know if I want something, I know where I can go and get it. And you know, it's definitely interesting. It would do a lot of people a lot of good to go and live somewhere completely different for a year and see what it's like. Because I mean, I know a lot of people that they've never moved out of the town that they were born in.
Yeah.
And it's very different when you go out there. I'm sorry, I don't mean to overrun this, but one of the things that really struck me was we were eating in an Indian restaurant. Because Indian restaurants are great because everybody speaks English as a second language. So it's very easy to go in there and talk to Indian people. And there was a lady in there, and she was working as a waitress. And we're like, you know, where, you know, are you working here? She said, yes, I left my family of 3 small children to come to work in Tokyo. And because I can earn money here, and I send it all back home.
Wow.
And it's powerful. We do not realize how privileged we actually are until you get out there and you see what the world is like. And it annoys me when people, they say, oh, you just literally don't know what you're talking about until you experience it. And you see people that are genuinely living on nothing and live in poverty. You know, we do not know. People do not know what's out there. They really don't. And again, that's another rant for another day.
Fascinating. Thank you so much.
I think
Very
Oscar
well
has
said.
got a question as well.
Very well said, Leighton, and thank you, Kerry, for raising a very interesting question there about cultures. Anne's confirmed on the chat that she doesn't need to ask a question, so I'm going to finish the formal question and answer session. Go ahead, Leighton.
I think Oscar had got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Oscar, I missed you earlier. My apologies.
Wasn't so much a question as a comment. It sounds fascinating that they presumably have desks with a similar design then to the old Morrison shelters in the Second World War.
A thick desk is something that a lot of people have. I mean, the desk I've got in my office is just like it's probably about 15 mil. My one in Tokyo is like 2 inches thick. So it's got some bounce potential on there, not crushes your head potential.
Leighton, thank you, and thank you, Oscar. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting talk and a very lively question and answer session with trying to understand more about Japanese culture and some of the ideas we pick. Just to conclude, the one point I pick up, which I thought was excellent advice, because you know you've lived it, you've done it, was something applies to all of us. You said about handling stress and dealing with it quickly.
Mm.
And I think that's something we all have a challenge with. And everybody needs a friend, is the way I always put it. To some extent, it doesn't matter who your friend is, as long as it's someone you can trust. And as you know, it's often more difficult to talk to a close member of the family or something, and sometimes talking to a stranger is easier. And that's, in a sense, what chaplaincy service is about. So, Leighton, thank you for your preparation of the talk. It was absolutely excellent. I know we've all enjoyed it. I can tell that by the people, and we've actually run on because it was very well done by you, Leighton. So we wish you well in your business. We hope very much you will join us on the last Thursday of each month, as and when you can. We thank Anne for joining us. Catherine had to go, but she was another lady who was very well taken by your speech, as was Michael, who's left us. So very well done to you. We don't applaud anymore, but we'll all do a little Zoom applaud to you. Thank you for your efforts indeed. If anyone wants, Anne's put her hand up, so she's ready to make a comment. Oh no, that was just her hand.
Just clapping.